Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope this message finds you well wherever you are in the world. This is dedicated to my dear friends in the Criterion subreddit group. There is a subreddit group that is dedicated to Criterion, the Criterion collection, and the people in that subreddit group have been so generous and kind, and you have made me feel so welcomed into your community. Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of your community. It's really such an honor and privilege that I feel. And so thank you so much. It's very fun, very engaging, and very enlightening. So once again, to the subreddit group, thank you very much. My heartfelt thanks to you. And I mention this because recently the subreddit group, in the subreddit group, there emerged a particular thread referring to me in this channel. It was very kind. I was so touched by that mention. So thank you very much for that kind mentioning of me in this channel. And in that thread, there was a specific request directed to me to, it was if this particular post gets 100 upvotes or more, then we should have Daisuke talk about the film Jellyfish Eyes. And so I looked at that post, and lo and behold, it reached the threshold. And so I am once again very grateful to the subreddit community and your dedication to the Criterion collection, and your enthusiasm and warmth and generosity of spirit is so much appreciated by me that the very least that I could do was to show my thanks. And how can I do that? What is one way that I could try to begin to hope to do something like that? Well, how about we do this? If you don't mind, I'd like to share with you some thoughts and comments that I have with respect to a particular film that is found in the Criterion collection. The spine number is 787. The filmmaker is Takashi Murakami, and the film is from 2013. The name of the film is Jellyfish Eyes. So what to say about this film, Jellyfish Eyes? It is, on its very basic story level, it's a film about a young boy who is having certain issues with his family and his school life. He's trying to fit in, and it's that sort of lonely character that's seeking some kind of solace or friendship or kinship or some kind of sense of belonging, not necessarily finding it until certain events start to unravel throughout the course of the film concerning a number of characters that he meets along the way. One being a young girl whose name is Saki, and the young boy's name is Masashi, and there is an interesting interaction that occurs between these two characters, and perhaps they share a similar commonality in terms of the way in which their relationships in their families, respectively, are turning out throughout the film. But also, the film, of course, develops through what's probably the main centerpiece of the film, which is these creatures, the friends, or the furendo, And so we have these creatures that inhabit this world through some reasonings or mythology that arises throughout the course of the film, and we get an explanation slowly but surely as to the tapestry and world that is being built around this centerpiece of the film, which are these creatures, one of which is featured quite prominently on the cover art for the Criterion release right here. And that forms the essential backbone of the film, and there are interesting sort of hijinks in terms of cute interactions with the creatures. The creatures have a certain skill set that are shown off in these very elaborately staged battle scenes, etc. And the plot then sort of escalates quite exponentially, in fact, from there, and it leads to a very interesting conclusion to the whole proceeding. So, in a nutshell, that is the general gist of Jellyfish Eyes. So there is at its core a kind of emotional weight to it in terms of the main character Masashi and the way in which he is interacting and forming bonds, not only with Kuragebo, or the friend or the creature that he encounters, but also with the other children around him, in particular the young girl Saki. And so, and this also carries through to the relationships that he has with his own family, etc. And so this forms, all these relationships with Masashi at the center form a kind of emotional core to this film that one can attach oneself to in terms of one's sympathies as a viewer in watching this film. And also there is an elaborate world that is being created and developed in terms of the creature designs and the way in which they inhabit the world and their physicalities, the rules of physics, and what their situations are, etc., which also adds a further dimension of wonder and possibility to this film. And I really mean that. I think there's a nice sense of world building here. So that is, in a nutshell, a general sense of this film. And there is room for further expansion, perhaps as suggested in one of the supplements to the Criterion release, which is the trailer to Jellyfish Eyes 2. Which, to my understanding, has not yet been completed or released in any form as of now, which is March 2020. Although I do also understand that the director Murakami himself has been reported to have said in interviews in Japan that he is currently working on Jellyfish Eyes 2. So that's an interesting development, if that is indeed true. But in any event, my friends, my point is that there is the sense that this is a world that is just beginning to be on the cusp of exploration in this film, Jellyfish Eyes, and there seems to be much more room for further development should the need arise, of course. So there is that kind of aspect to this film. I do want to say, of course, that as a fan of the Criterion Collection, I interact with a lot of people online who are also fans of the Criterion Collection. And I appreciate the fact that this film has a certain reputation among some Criterion Collection fans and admirers. In other words, I know that some people regard this film as and wonder as to, for example, the reasons for its inclusion in the Criterion Collection, the quality of the film when compared to, let's say, other titles can be found in the Criterion Collection, etc. I get all that, and I don't necessarily, how should I put it? Well, let me start with this. When I first saw this film, through the Criterion Collection release, I was somewhat. I didn't hate the film, but I found myself feeling somewhat at the end of it saying, okay, that was interesting, but not necessarily remembering it afterward. And so I thought it was okay for what it was, but then that was all. That's what I thought. And that's how I felt, not having watched it subsequently. However, some time had passed, and then when I watched the film subsequent time, I watched it this time with my young daughter. She really got into it. She was so much into the story of Masashi. She was really interested in the creatures, and in particular Kuragebo, and she got into the whole story about the cloaked figures and the whole conspiracy espionage angle. She was really into that as well. And there's a sense of the suspense generated through the fighting scenes and the computer effects and the whole world that was created. She was really into it. And she got into the drama, and by the time the film was over, she was really enamored by the whole world that was created by Murakami and crew. And I was watching the film with her, and I realized that watching the film through her eyes, through my daughter's eyes at that time, was very valuable to me, and it really taught me that sometimes I must try to watch a film through a different perspective than that which is my own. Because, as I say, when I first saw this film, I didn't think it was the worst thing in the world that I had seen, but at the same time, I didn't think it was that memorable. But now, seeing it again with my daughter, I came to the conclusion that it did have an effect, and it did have an impact. And by looking at it through her eyes, I was able to see that, yes, there is a kind of earnestness in terms of the way that the characters are presented. It may not necessarily be the most nuanced way to present a character or story. There might be, one way that one can criticize this film perhaps is the way in which the story is presented in certain ways that might be described as being cliched. And I get those criticisms very much. But at the same time, a story that is easy to follow, easy to understand, is also quite potentially, anyway, the mark of a potentially effective work. And I think from the viewpoint of my daughter, I was able to appreciate that more. And by feeling that way, I felt that I could appreciate this film much more from that vantage point. And so now I look at this film, and I look at it with a great sense of appreciation about its earnestness, about its genuine sense of wanting to entertain. And I think does it succeed on every level? No, I don't think it does. Does it have to? I don't think it does either. My daughter now is a little bit older. Does she watch this film now? No, she doesn't watch this film that much, to be perfectly honest. Although, if we put it in the player, she would become very interested to watch it again. So this is to say that while it's not the greatest film that that my daughter or I have ever seen, it still was able to capture us and capture our attentions in a way that I think was very effective for what it was trying to do. And thus, I have a great deal of respect for this film, and I don't necessarily consider it to be, the worst film that I've ever seen. On the contrary, I find it to be quite charming on some levels. And in fact, I would go so further and say that the Criterion Collection release further helps me to cement this notion that it is a film that I think is very charming and very earnest. The Criterion Collection release that's here has, among many of its supplements, it has the one-on-one interview with the director and creator and artist Takashi Murakami, as well as a short sort of behind-the-scenes documentary showing the special effects crew at work in their workshop. And then it has a longer documentary which shows the inception of the film, pre-production meetings, and then actual production, and then shooting on location, working with the actors and everything like that, and seeing Murakami at work as a director for the first time, essentially, seeing how he is trying his best to work with this material, but he is also feeling certain senses of challenge along the way, given that this is a fresh art form or medium that he is working in. And so through these supplements, I was able to get a sense of a number of things that I think are very significant that further helped me when I watch this film or consider this film. So first is the supplements show that Murakami is, I think, a very earnest and down-to-earth director. He seems very friendly and affable, and he's also someone who seems, at least according to what I see in the supplements, to be an artist that is open to suggestion and even criticism. We see him at work with fellow crew members, and he receives criticism from crew members as well about ideas and stories and how they develop, etc. So my sense, therefore, is that Murakami wasn't necessarily working on this film in the mode of a kind of vanity project or anything like that, and he wasn't necessarily directing in a kind of dictatorial style. On the contrary, he seemed very open to ideas, and he seemed open to criticism, which gives me the sense that, as I was trying to suggest, he seems to have been approaching this work in terms of a real earnest attempt at creating some new form of art for him. Another point which I thought was very fascinating is he was also very hands-on with the creature designs, and also he was very upfront about his own art and his own background. He has a very distinct visual style in terms of his art and his designs in general. I'm not talking about the film, I'm talking about him as an artist. And so his use of color and his very vibrant use of color and shapes to create a kind of graphic art or pop art look to his works, I think translates very well into this film, especially when we consider the creature designs and the way in which color is used. I mean, they're not by themselves, I wouldn't call them the most radically inventive creature designs in the world, but they do employ certain uses of geometric shapes and a combination of size and color to create an image that is certainly memorable and not off-putting in the slightest. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the creature designs. On the contrary, I think they work really fine within the context of the film. And there's also a sort of cute nature to them, especially kuragebo, and so I find them to be very, very, in and of themselves, quite charming, and they work very well within the context of the film. And so, and they are examples of the art of Murakami, and so this film is a kind of moving portrait or a moving example of the artist's work. And also, this is made so clear when we see him in some of the documentaries actually working with the clay, sculpting the clay with his own hands, and just refining it and reshaping it and cutting away at it, etc., like a real artisan. And so to see that is also quite effective from my point of view. So Murakami as an artist, and as an artist who's really working with his hands on this film, in giving it his stamp of artistic creativity, as it were. And then the other thing that I thought was quite remarkable in watching the supplements from the Criterion collection is that Murakami was mentioning how this was released in 2013, and he was mentioning and referring quite directly the very terrible natural disaster that occurred in Japan in the year 2011. There was a big earthquake that occurred in northern part of Japan, the tsunami disaster, and everything that entailed. It was a very dark and terrible time for Japan. This was in 2011. Well, this is 2013 when the film was released, and Murakami, the director, in the interview, is talking about how this disaster was on his mind. And of course, the disaster that I'm referring to is a natural disaster, and it also involved man-made disaster circumstances in terms of Fukushima and all that entailed. And so there's a natural disaster element and a human-made disaster element that made this time, 2011, March 2011, to be very, very dark, and it was a very devastating time. And to hear Murakami talk about this moment and to hear him refer to this moment as he is describing this film makes this film, I think, quite poignant from the viewpoint of that. I don't think the film necessarily speaks directly to the 2011 disaster, but there are elements that can be seen to be a kind of maybe reference point to that, or a kind of metaphorical working with the concept of that, etc. And so I find the film to be a further earnest approach to that very significant point in modern Japanese history. And Murakami speaks to this directly. And when you see the film, I think one can recognize that some of these elements do exist, even if they are indirect. They still do exist, I would suggest. And so this gives the film an extra added layer of potential significance, I think. And I really think that the Criterion supplements do help in approaching this film and to get a sense of what went on and what was the thinking behind this, and why it is that the story is like this, and why the creatures are designed like this, etc. And we also get a sense, I should add one last thing, there is a sense also of Murakami as a Japanese person. He's talking about little details of Japanese society. He's talking about little details of eating noodles, or eating little bits of food, or understanding little bits of TV or media culture, or this or that, etc. And I think those little elements also find themselves as little details that emerge here and there throughout the film Jellyfish Eyes, in terms of little bits of food that are eaten by the creatures, or little references to other art forms, other characters in manga or anime, and that sort of thing. And so I think this film does present also a kind of exploration of this pop Japanese culture, or this sort of everyday Japanese culture that comes through in many of the details that are shown in this film. And so that gives one a potential, a plate of potential bases by which one can then look at this film and try to evaluate it or reevaluate it on its own terms. So I think the Criterion Collection did a very fine job in presenting this work. And I think that with that, and also with the extra added benefit of being able to watch this film, as I say, with my young child, I regard this film now as being a work that, while it's not the greatest film I've ever seen, it is one that I find charming, and I find quite charming in terms of its earnestness, and one can tell that it's really trying to entertain, and it's really trying to show a story. Is it the most brilliant story in the world? Maybe not. Maybe there are some elements of the story that might seem somewhat predictable or somewhat unsurprising in terms of this kind of genre. But then again, I think there is also something to be said about a story that is quote-unquote told in a simple, easy-to-digest manner. And perhaps this kind of story can reach certain audiences rather than others. And so when we think also about a film as being a piece of work that has the potential of reaching a wide variety of people, then Jellyfish Eyes, I think, is no exception to that. And perhaps it might not necessarily reach this particular crowd, but it can potentially reach another particular crowd here, or another particular crowd there, etc. And so I think, therefore, this film does have a potential for being one that is fun and lively, or there are people who do think this way, and I think that it is a very fun, lively, and innocent work, and I am very happy that it's in the Criterion collection. Now, I should further add, of course, that there's no rule that says you have to like every single film in the Criterion collection. I mean, Criterion collection discs are very expensive relative to other Blu-ray discs from other labels, of course. Retail price is very expensive, and so one expects a certain level of quote-unquote quality, right? And so if this kind of film is not your cup of tea, I think that's fine. If you don't like this kind of film, or if you like this kind of film but you don't like this specific film, I think either scenario is perfectly legitimate and reasonable. There's nothing that says that one has to buy this Blu-ray. If this isn't one's cup of tea, then one doesn't have to watch it at all. I mean, there are many other films, so many films in the Criterion collection alone to occupy one's time. So one doesn't need to concern oneself with this film if this film isn't one's preference for entertainment, let me put it that way. And I'm very much open to that, and I think that if someone expresses a dislike or even hate for this film, I won't necessarily say anything to try to dissuade that person. I think that's a very legitimate and reasonable reaction to have to this film, or to any film in general, really. I think it's very much a healthy response to not necessarily like something if one doesn't like it. So, and so the point of this video is not to try to say to everyone, you have to like this film, you have to like that film. But I do want to say that for me personally, I do find it to be a very earnest attempt at entertainment, and so I can see it through that perspective. And by seeing it through that perspective, I can appreciate it for what I think it's trying to be. And the Criterion release helps me further in seeing the merits to this film that exist, and I do believe that they do exist with this film. If you are another person who is a fan or admirer of this film, I'd very much like to hear about it. So in any event, my friends, if you have any thoughts or comments about this film, please feel free to leave them below in the comment section. I would very much love to hear what it is you have to say. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now, and once again I want to thank my dear friends at the subreddit group, the Criterion subreddit group. I hope my comments didn't disappoint you. If they did, I really apologize. That wasn't my intention. But you asked about the film Jellyfish Eyes, and so yes, here are my comments on Jellyfish Eyes. So I hope that was okay, and I look forward to our continuing conversations going forward. My dear friends in the subreddit group, thank you once again for making me feel so at home. I'm very, very grateful. Okay, so that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, thank you and cheers.